A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Welcome to another webinar. It's fantastic that you could join us in summer. As we normally do, we start with the verses of the Quran, which we'll start with. This verse, which I've chosen, is a very famous verse at the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, where it talks about the relations between wives. And it starts off with saying what is permissible. أَحَلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ. It has been made permissible for you for the night before fasting. رُفَأَسْ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. Rufa'as is to go to or to attend or to meet, to go to your wives. And obviously this is in terms of for physical relations. And then we have the very famous verse, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتَ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنَّ. They are clothing for you and you're clothing for them. And this is a beautiful metaphor that the Quran has, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses, in that you cover for them, they cover for you, but in between you, there's no hijab, right? So in between the relation between the husband and the wife, there is no hijab, but that you are clothing, they're clothing for you. They've got the best of interest for you in showing the best of you, and you're clothing for them, and that you hide whatever is from them and whatever is personal and private between that relationship. And the verse goes on, "Alam Allah innakum kuntum تُخْطَئُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ." Allah knows that before you used to deceive yourself, so He accepted your forgiveness, and فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَعَفَا عَنْكُمْ. So He accepted your tawbah, and عَفَا عَنْكُمْ, He forgave you. We continue. Another verse in the Quran, which talks about being those يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوْمًا بِالْقِسْطِ. This concept of justice in Islam, even if it be against yourselves, which again is truly something which is distinct as to how Islam values justice. So this verse, chapter 4, verse 135, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوَامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Be of a nation, be known as a community that upholds justice. شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. That even that you are witnesses against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if that is against yourself. And it is a very powerful concept of justice, that even if stuff were to be said against our own selves, we should still say that to stand firm in justice and what is right. And then it goes on to say, even against yourself or your parents, awladina wal akrabina, as in the qurba, the relatives. So even for yourself, for your parents and the relatives, to maintain that justice. Other verses which talk about being just. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu attaqullah wa qulu qawlan sadida. And again, what's really interesting in the verses which I'm showing you, they're all starting with Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu. So Allah is addressing the believers. It's addressing the mu'minun. It's not addressing anyone. It is addressing those who have iman, to first have taqwa, fear Allah, And when they speak, وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. When you're speaking, have just words in your speak words of justice. Um, Again, another concept in Surah Al-Tawbah, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu. Again, attaqullah, have taqwa, wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. And if you do associate with someone, or if you are with someone, be with those who are truthful. So we have these verses which talk about upholding justice, upholding words of truth when we are engaging in conversation, or even, and to be just, even if it was against us or against our family members. So we have this beautiful concept of, in Islam, of kist, of upholding justice, which is um, which is really, really great. So I wanted to kind of start with that. If you're joining us for the first time and you don't know who we are, so Strong Support is a peer support organization for Muslims who struggle with sexual or gender identity. We have a free consultation, which is available for everyone. That includes non-Muslims, as sometimes we get inquiries from people who are non-Muslims to say, "Can we get help?" And of course, you can get help, and we have offered help for people who are struggling with either sexual or gender identity. We have halakas, we have circles, which are online. We have, for men at present, we have on Mondays and Wednesdays at 7 and 7:30 UK time. We have an Arabic circle at the moment on Sundays at 6 p.m. UK time. There's also one-to-one coaching, which I myself offer on Wednesday and Friday evenings. And then we also have, if your mosque or another organization would like to engage in an event or something, we have done that in the past as well. And one of the ways that we do a lot of our outreach is webinars, which are completely open and free, and fulfills our commitment of publicizing this issue more, making it more accessible, especially for people who struggle with gender identity or sexuality, to find uh, a way or a forum or a way to speak on this. And this is live. We're live on YouTube. And this is kind of the webinars that we have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, Sheikh Mustafa Umar. Sheikh Mustafa completed his Bachelor's of Science in Information and Computer Science from UC Irvine. Also, he completed his BA in Theology and Islamic Law from the European Institute of Islamic Sciences in France. Um, he also completed his MA in Islamic Studies from here in the UK in University of Gloucestershire. He has studied Islamic Sciences for a year in Lucknow at Nadwat al-Ulama, spent another year studying in Cairo. Shout out to Cairo, because I know some of you are joining us from there. Um, Sheikh Mustafa later completed the traditional IFTA program at Darul IFTA, which is again here in Birmingham, granting him the title of Mufti, as well as being specialist in fiqh in Islamic law. He's authored several books, um, served Muslim community in so many ways. Again, I actually had a parent who joins us from California who are saying, "Oh, there used to be the California um, um, Islamic University, right? There used to be the Islamic University, and great work which was done over there in those trainings." So as is written there, he's mashallah served the community for 2 decades in 4 different centers, founded the California Islamic University is a current member of the Fiqh Council of North America and a senior fellow at the Yaqeen Institute. Now, we know Sheikh, and he has not been a stranger to these conversations. If at all, he has been the forefront of these conversations, which is truly honorable. So even if I just search his name on Google and I write Sheikh Mustafa Umar LGBT, there's so much which comes up, right? So much good, I would probably say, that comes up. So we have a lot of you know Wahid Jensen, the great work that he did on the podcast, Away Beyond the Rainbow. There is a two-part perspective on contemporary issues and Sharia perspectives, which is great. Um, then there is actually a piece which why we did this webinar. There's a piece where Sheikhna had written a fantastic summary on key LGBT issues that affect family relations. We're picking a part of that towards the end of that document where it talks about marriage to people who have same-sex attraction. There's so many videos. There's a great video 2 years ago that was done by Yaqeen Institute, and which was followed by a curriculum on LGBTQ, which was quite comprehensive as well, which you can find as well. And very recently, in a convention, Shaifna also talked about gender roles and gender identity. I would also like to add, it's a fantastic resource. There's another resource which is called Ask the Scholars, which he also maintains, where as you know, he's a scholar of fiqh, where you can ask questions, which is fantastic for people who are wanting that kind of Q&A. And I know that having that accessibility in this modern age is very, very helpful. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sheikhna. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your work. We have not met, but I've heard of you in so many forums. I know you did something with Straight Struggle. I think a few years ago we had a similar conversation, and thank you so much for not shying away from this topic, not shying away from the fiqh that kind of surrounds this topic, especially for those of us who struggle with same-sex attraction, knowing our ulama are interested in this topic, interested in the difficulties that people have around this topic. So thank you so much for that. It's a real honor. I guess the initial question I have, and to get us going, is what made it so interesting for you to work on this? And I've seen that you have talked about this multiple times, that you've taken this issue of LGBT across. I wonder what it was that maybe initially piqued your interest, or maybe why you chose to work on fiqh around this issue rather than other issues. Be really curious as to what maybe piqued your interest in talking about this.
It's a really good question, actually. I have to kind of think back. Um, I think, I've always been somebody who's interested in trying to tackle questions that are going to arise in the future. When it comes to cloning and when it comes to genetically, engineered meat and all of those things. Because I come from like my background, I always liked sci-fi movies and I like to think about the future and all of that. So that's one aspect of wanting to think about what's going to come in the future. And when I looked around for answers, I encountered, a few people who were struggling with this, and I encountered some readings and things like that. And when I tried to look for some answers, I didn't really find many scholars saying much. And there was very few resources. And then when I finally, so that was one motivation. It's like, I didn't see anyone doing anything about it. I said, someone should say something. Someone should do something. The second thing was we're in California. So California is the problems that arise from sexual and gender identity. We're at the forefront of the
Mm.
problems, of causing the problems or dealing with them in the wrong way. And when I would go and tell other people, I say, we have these issues in our community over here. In other states, they would actually just make fun. They say, that you California people, you guys have this problem. We don't have this problem, and I used to say the way that I understand the world is that whatever problem, like whatever good and bad begins in a major metropolitan city like, Los Angeles or something, it spreads around the world.
That's
So
right.
you
Mm.
can't just sit here and say like, well, this is not our problem. You guys have this problem. Say if we have this problem, you're going to have the problem in 5 to 10 years, well, almost guaranteed. The good stuff is going to spread and the bad stuff spreads, through globalization. So that was the second thing. There was kind of like a dismissive nature of some of the scholars that I met, and I was sure that this is going to be happening. So it was kind of like, you guys don't realize that you're going to be in trouble the way that we're in trouble if you don't get your act together. And then the third thing, which I really think pushed me, was many scholars I spoke with, they were really afraid to speak on this issue.
Mm.
And for a while, I followed in their footsteps. They said, "Be careful, don't talk. You're gonna ruin your reputation. You're gonna be destroyed." And on a personal level, I was struggling. As an imam, I was struggling with where do you draw the line between
Mm.
being wise and not saying everything to protect your reputation versus somebody speaking up. Like speaking up for Palestine or speaking up for any cause. And it comes down to, I had a personal struggle about, where do we start questioning our own sincerity, where we're not going to say anything. If no one's going to say anything, we're going to be responsible in front of Allah. So I went through that struggle personally on some issues, and this was definitely one of those issues because a lot of scholars were being canceled. They were getting in trouble. They would lose their, invitations to different, churches or schools or whatever it may be. And then I decided at some moment, over a decade ago, I said, you know what, I'm going to be the one who who doesn't care about this. I mean, of course, I'm going to speak with wisdom, but I'm not going to be afraid of what my reputation. This is going to be like my jihad, personal jihad. So I chose to do that. And when I chose to do that, many people would tell me, they would talk to me and they say, you know what, we're very scared for you. We're worried for you, but also we're very proud of you. So we're going to push you in the front, and because we're not willing to do this, so we're going to push you in the front and you keep doing what you're doing. In fact, one imam told me, he made a joke. He was a funny, very popular imam. He made a joke. He says, you know what, I said a bunch of stuff in the 1990s, on LGBT and homosexuality and all that. And he goes, those videos, those clips are still haunting me wherever I go. He said some very, little over the line things, but back in the 90s, 80s, you could say whatever you want. It was more socially acceptable. He says, this has harmed me so much. I've just really toned down, and I'm not taking that chance right now because I'm working on some other things that I'm trying to do as a public figure. But he said, you know what? I want to encourage you. You keep doing what you're doing. And I promise you that I will visit you when you go to jail. I said, come on, man. So it was a joke. It was a joke, but he was basically, so I think that really motivated me because people would privately tell me too that, like, what you're saying, and you're putting yourself in a type of risk. Um, we can't do that. So we're very happy, we're supporting you, but you're one of the few that's going to be able to do that. That was back then. Now, alhamdulillah, a lot more scholars have changed their stance now, and they're speaking out much more, and they're not afraid to address this issue. But about maybe 5 years ago, or especially 10 years ago, uh, everyone was really afraid, or they thought this is not something we need to even talk about. This is something that we should ignore. So I think that's kind of what really motivated me. All those three factors that I mentioned were very, were kind of the push and the drive to get me to, talk about these things.
And I love what you said about the sincerity, right? Sincerity that you in your heart you see that there's something wrong and people aren't talking about it and people are afraid and I can vouch that you were talking about it when it was unpopular to talk about it, like what you were saying, and because you talked about it so early, Now, when you talk about it, there's so much depth into it. It's not just the normal narrative that you see a sheikh talking about it, but you actually go into the complexities of, kind of, well, if we have such people in our communities, how do we integrate them? How do we deal with them? Rather than just talking about it in a very like this is bad, this we shouldn't do this, but actually, going a step further and for the community which is watching here, how it isn't like we have parents who join in who have children who are struggling with this. You have imams and teachers, you have counselors, you have um, people who are themselves struggling, and obviously there's a difference between gender dysphoria and same-sex attraction. So there's such a huge amount of people who are affected by the issue, and then the need for um, scholars like yourselves to help guide us to say, okay, what in these situations, what is the right way, and what is the right one, and credit to you, and credit for your bravery in able to do that, and that has definitely been seen. Now, when I saw, actually, one of the parents, they approached me and they said, "Oh, Sheikh Mustafa Umar." I was like, yeah, of course I know. And he said, oh, he's done this paper and it's really interesting. You need to have a read of it. And when I read it, it was the first time I read someone talking about marriage, right, for people who are struggling. Because I don't know why, but no one ever thinks about it. No one ever thinks, okay, when these people have, kind of done their work, are ready, how do they then approach marriage? And I was like, oh my God, this is the first time I'm reading a scholar write that. And yes, it was fantastic. So that paper, for those who don't know, that was the paper on key LGBT issues. And I think you did a recent paper in the convention as well, where you referenced that. What made you write that document? What was going through your mind when you, or maybe what was given to you when you were writing that document on LGBT issues, key LGBT issues in terms of family relations?
Mm. So that was actually at AMJA. AMJA is the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. It's actually a scholars conference for imams and scholars to present, to do research and then present their papers. So it was a paper that I was asked to write, and I was asked to present. So I presented that exact same paper in the conference in front of, about maybe 300 scholars and students of knowledge who are on their way to become scholars. So, what I think what motivated me is this was an idea that came from I believe he's the executive director of AMJA. His name is Sadiq. He's a great guy and he works for Intel. He's an engineer on the side, but then he also organizes this AMJA conference as well. So he came up with the idea, and I think the reason why he came up with the idea is because about 10 years prior, I suggested to AMJA in their conference that they should have their next year topic, because it was going to be about gender. I said they should include the topic of transgender. This was like 2015 or 2016 or something like that. And I remember the response in the room was, are you crazy? Like, we don't need to talk about these things. And it actually, a lot of imams, they said, you know what, we don't want to deal with we're not going to talk about homosexuality, and we'll talk about, this and that. And I said, I clarified, this was in public forum. I said the answer that I'm hearing from some of the imams shows that they don't understand the difference between homosexuality and gender identity. It's not the same thing at all.
Mhm.
And they kept on repeating the same thing. So basically, the idea was shot down at that time. This was a long time ago, and Sadiq was there, and he was like, you know what? He spoke to me. I don't know if I should say this publicly, but he told me privately. A few people told me privately. They said, you know what? Just people are not understanding what you're saying. and they don't understand what's going to be happening. So Sadiq was one of those people who always believes that the scholar should be at the forefront on issues. So as soon as they decided to do a conference on family issues. There's always a theme. The theme is sometimes medical issues. Sometimes the theme is food. Sometimes the theme is economic transactions. So the moment he saw this family issues, he contacted me and he said, you're going to definitely be speaking this year and you got to write a paper on this one. So he's the one who came up with the idea. And he's the one who told me, he says, you know what? I want you to focus on the family issues that happen, especially between parents and their children or between this and that, when it comes to anything related to LGBT. And so he's the one who kind of gave me these targeting questions. And he says, make sure you address this and make sure you address that. We want it to be as comprehensive as possible in a short paper because people go and they'll eventually search this paper up, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20 years from now. And we want to have something written, even if you just touch every little point that's connected to family and LGBT, we want a resource to be available on our website, because people do go to our website eventually and look things up. So I got to credit him. The idea actually came from him. He said,
I
let's
love
zoom
this.
in and focus on this one. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And here we are. We're talking about that paper, and a parent, like you said, a parent sent it to me, and I was like, wow, this is great. Um, and then this topic which comes up. One of the topics which you address in there is marriage towards the end of that paper, and uh, you put it quite clear where you say that there needs to be a disclosure, right? There needs to be a disclosure for these people. Now, as we know, especially for people on the call, so many people that I speak to myself, obviously I have my um, therapeutic hat on when I have this question, but obviously we have to put that away and look at what is the from law, from fiqh, right? From the sources from the primary sources that we take from Islam, what is the direction and what is it that's being said, and because as you know, this issue is covered with so much shame and so much people find it so difficult to talk about it, especially when it comes to marriage situations where most of us, right, aren't gonna tell about our negative traits, right? when you're getting married and you're thinking, oh God, this is it, and it was really, really interesting because when we have gone to scholars in the past, they would give statements such as, if the individual doesn't see this as being an issue later on, then they can't tell it. But that was confusing because for most of the people, same-sex attraction is something they're going to have forever, right? Or they're going to live with something. They have an attraction, they're going to act upon it, but they know that they're not going to act upon it, but it is something that they will struggle with, right? So it's very little, maybe in a few cases where it's very incidental and the attraction isn't as strong that they're worried that it may impact later on. So then the was like, okay, if you think this isn't going to affect your future, then don't bring that in, right? Um, but then going back to, and I think you started this conversation on sincerity, right? Ikhlas, where our religion puts a lot of emphasis on being sincere, being true. And the concept of marriage, again, is a very, and when you start the paragraph, you talk about Surat al Nisa and how it's a covenant. So it's not something which is to be taken lightly, right? So it's a ahad which I'm making between me and Allah and the whole community, that I'm going with this person. So it's not something which is normal, right? It's an app in a fiqh sense. It's an abnormal way, and so it must have some rules and jurisdictions of how much does the other spouse need to know. What do they need to know what are the things that definitely um, they have, um, and yeah. So I'm very curious to see um, how did that question come up in terms of marriage. How was it that you came to the conclusion that you did? And I wonder after that if you had any responses based on what you had put there in terms of that it does need to be disclosed.
Well, let me just clarify one thing. So,
Mhm.
the exact wording that I used was, but this condition may warrant being disclosed to the prospective
Uh-huh.
spouse. So they are
Uh-huh.
aware of the issue and can ensure they are prepared to deal with that, right? So I used academic language because I did keep it, I did not keep it so clear because not everyone's situation is going to be exactly the same, right?
Yes.
So I'll tell you why I put that in there, and I'll tell you kind of the reasoning, like where I came up with these limits. So in Islam, when we study fiqh, when we study the chapter on marriage, there is a lot of detail in every single fiqh is like Islamic law. And for those of you who are not fully aware, it's books of Islamic law that scholars study. And it's basically like many people have heard of like Imam Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi school of thought, and the Shafi'i school of thought. So any books that are kind of organized according to Islamic law, there's these different chapters that come across. There's a whole chapter on purification and prayer and Hajj and food, and economics, and then there's divorce and there's marriage and there's all sorts of different chapters. So in the chapter of marriage, where it goes through all the rules about marriage, when you perform the marriage, it needs to be said like this, and there must be witnesses, and there must be mahar, among almost every single, medium-sized book on Islamic law of fiqh, you'll find entire chapters about what are some of the wording that they use is defects. Like, do you have to disclose a defect to your spouse that you may have? And if you didn't disclose it, or if it comes up later on in the marriage, can the marriage be annulled? And what's going to happen in that situation? So this is known to like anyone who studies these books, any scholar who's going through a training program or something like that. All of these issues come in that chapter. So, for example, if somebody had infertility and they were diagnosed with infertility, they're not able to have children. This is something very serious where if you got married, the marriage can actually be annulled, which is totally different than a divorce. It means that the marriage, the marriage is deemed by a judge to be annulled and the two are separated, and the mahar, is canceled and all sorts of things like that. So this is kind of already in the back of my mind because we already studied these things in school. And so there's always, the serious defects, or let's a defect doesn't sound nice, but the reason why they use the word defect is called like khiyar or aib, things like that. The reason why they use it is because most of these rules come from the chapter of economic transactions. So what ends up happening is I don't want to get too technical for people, but basically, there's a bunch of rules based on hadith, the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, that when you're selling an item or you're trading, you're transacting, you have to disclose certain things that are in the item. And if there was a problem with the item, you're selling a phone and let's say the battery's been drained, it doesn't charge or something like that, you need to disclose things like that because it's going to affect the transaction or the sale. So when it comes to a lot of these rules, scholars applied analogy into marriage because they look at a marriage contract somewhat similar to an economic contract. Although, again, of course, this is not to diminish, the purpose of marriage. There's romance and there's love and there's care. But as a contract, they looked at contract law and they said some of these conditions carry over to the other conditions because they're both contracts at the end of the day. So that's kind of where the idea came from. So some of these things are clear cut. Is that what, if you have a major disability, or you have something that is going to really affect the purpose of marriage and what people normally are trying to get out of marriage, and you didn't disclose it, it's going to be considered a type of deception.
Mm.
And some type of deception is enough to invalidate the marriage contract. Some type of deception will not invalidate, but it's still forbidden. It's haram. It's like, you should have told this person that, this is what's going to be happening. This is kind of what you're getting. So this is something you struggle with, or you had a major injury, and because of this injury you're not going to be able to work in this field that happened to be your career for many years or something like that. So if somebody looks at your degree and they say, oh, you work in that field, but then you had some injury and you're not able to do that, and you say, well, you didn't want to disclose the fact that you're never going to be in that career due to the injury, that would be a type of deception that can potentially greatly affect the marriage. So there's things in those category on the one side where you have to absolutely disclose those things to your spouse. Then there's the other things, which are small things. You're not going to go into a pre-marriage interview on the Salams app or, Muz or something like that. And you're not going to be like, hey, you're interested in marriage? Oh, I'd like to get to know you. By the way, just wanted to let you know, I have backbitten people in the past year. I was gossiping about them about 7 times. I made Toba, but I just wanted to be completely transparent that I do engage in gossiping sometimes. Like you don't have to say that, and you're not gonna want to say something like that. So there's some things that you're not supposed to reveal, because especially when they come to your sins. The sins that are between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are not things that need to be revealed to anybody else. No matter how strong your relationship is, especially if something's in the past. So, the Sahaba, when we look at the Sahaba, every single one of them was a convert to Islam. Some of them did some really bad stuff before they became Muslim, and they didn't keep on revealing those things to other people. The general rule is, if Allah has protected you and put a screen over your sins, you're supposed to keep that screen over the sins. And there's a hadith about that as well. So you have basically two categories here. One of them is the principle that you're supposed to conceal your sins of the things that you've done in the past. You're not supposed to reveal them to anybody, because that's between you and Allah. On the other hand, there are some things which are likely to affect the marriage. You need to disclose them to your prospective spouse before going in. And then you have something in between this area, right? And in between this area is kind of a gray area. It's kind of you find a mix between some prospective spouses, or even, once you get married, then your spouse was like, well, I wish you would have told me that, you had you had smoked marijuana, when you were 13. I wish you would have told me that you had a girlfriend or a boyfriend before, and I'm not your first partner, or something like that. And so you'll find from the other person who wants to know this information, they're going to feel bad if they find out some other way. And they're like, well, I didn't know, you did that. I kept myself, pure and away from this stuff. And then I thought you were too, but you didn't. And then sometimes you find the flip side. You'll find the flip side from the person themselves. The other person's like, no, you don't need to tell me, but they kind of want to confess almost. And they're like, I want you to know, I've done this and all that, but I've made Toba. And you kind of, when you start getting connected with someone, you kind of want to feel that, you can trust them with like this secret, maybe that you've been keeping for a long time. And then that they're also going to be willing to support you. So you have all of these factors at play. And when it comes to this specific issue, when it comes to gender identity or sexual identity, it becomes very challenging, because the kind of, like you mentioned, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstandings about it. There's also a taboo about it. So it's like you may find the right person, everything clicks, everything matches, but this person is also human. They're going to be affected by the culture around them. So they may, if you revealed a prior alcohol addiction, they might have been like, oh, I'm okay with, like, I understand you've gotten through it. You reveal a prior drug addiction, they'd be like, oh, okay, that's fine. You reveal prior criminal history, they're like, oh, okay, well, that was in the past and you've made toba or whatever. So some things are just more triggering to other people, and an LGBT, issue, connected issue of a gender or sexual identity can be one of those triggering things that, the person would have been willing to accept you for whatever you had done in the past, but this is that one thing that just snaps, and it could be the other way around. There are some people who may be like, well, this one I'm okay with, but criminal history, absolutely not, because they have their own trauma. Maybe their uncle, got, committed a crime and was in jail, and they grew up that way. And there's certain things that which are just personally triggering for people, and it's really hard for them to deal with that and to process that. They're like, I could have overlooked anything but not this one particular thing, or maybe not alcohol, because my best friend's father used to beat up my best friend, and because of the alcohol. So like they become attached to that one particular thing. And that's why, generally when it comes to disclosing something like this, it's neither 100% in that category, like infertility or something along those lines, nor is it completely in this category where it's like, what, oh, okay, it's you gossiped a little bit, or you ate pork once in your life or something like that, and that's between you and Allah, and you made tawbah for it or something like that. This one kind of falls somewhere in the middle. And the reason why it falls in the middle is kind of what you mentioned, is because when it comes to the identities, when someone is kind of adopting, it's not just the feelings. There's the attraction, and then there's the feelings of gender dysphoria. There's the feelings of same-sex attraction. But when someone has kind of internalized this, and not just a fleeting feeling, but if an actual internalization of, hey, this is who I am, that is likely to have a much more longer lasting effect. It's almost like, I kind of tell people, I'm like, what, if you smoked marijuana in the past, 5 years ago, that's different than if you were shooting up heroin, or you're doing cocaine, or you're doing something really hard that is gonna have some effect on your more permanent damage, more likelihood of relapse, going through addiction, whatever you might have been through. There's certain triggers that you have. So not every situation is going to be in the same category, but there's a difference between someone who simply had the feelings versus somebody who internalized this for a period of time, or engaged in a lifestyle where they're actually having relationships, or they're actually cross-dressing, or whatever it may be. And we have to separate the people into two different categories when addressing this issue.
And that's such a good way of putting it, because someone who's acted upon the same-sex attraction, and then they have repented, and they know that they're not going to act again, you could argue you don't need to tell your spouse every little detail of how you acted out or what the acting out was, right? So in terms of the action, you can definitely say, well, Allah covers those sins, right? But when it comes to the part which they don't have control over, which is their feelings, right? So their feelings may have developed, they've not chosen uh, to have the gender dysphoria or to have the same-sex attraction, but they know that they will continue to have that even after marriage, right? So, and then, you use the language like defect or disability, and I think that is correct, because it is something which is a hindrance, right, for them in achieving that. So, would you say that if it's not talking about the actions, but only talking about the feelings, then that should be something that they should tell, if it's only talking about the feelings and not whether they had acted upon it or not. And I know a lot of people say, well, if I tell them about my feelings, the next question is going to be, did you act upon them, right? But for the purposes of um, jurisprudentially, would someone need to talk about the feelings, knowing that they will struggle with these feelings even after the marriage, if we put the actions to one side?
Hmm. Yeah, so we look at it from a purely, black and white, like fiqh perspective, right? Like a law perspective. There's different categories. There's a category of what's called fard, like you have to do it. And then
Yeah.
there's a category of like what we call sunnah or mustahab, like this is a recommended practice, right? So if we look at it purely from the fard perspective, like is it a requirement? Well, when would it be a requirement? It would be a requirement if somebody is still acting upon it, still having relationships, right? And this is actually quite common. You'll find many families, there someone's in a relationship, whether it be straight or gay, for example, and they're like, well, we need to help get them out away from this person, or whatever it may be. The simple solution will be let's get them married, which is not always the best solution, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's not always the best solution, but people do it anyways. So if they're going to do something like that, and especially we're talking about, let's say, a homosexual relationship, and they're going into that, and whoever they're going to be marrying, and I see cases like this, the other person is in a similar situation where they're also in a relationship and their family's telling them too, and they're like, well, okay, we're willing to do this, knowing that both of us are kind of like, on the other side. Then yeah, like this is something that you would need to disclose, because it's going to have a very likely effect on the marriage. When the likelihood gets very, very high, you need to disclose it. You absolutely need to disclose it. When the likelihood starts to get lower, then it kind of falls into the recommended category, not in the absolute required category. And like you said, before, I want to make sure I don't skip some points. The time to disclose this, because people struggle, even people who have none of these issues. There's a massive struggle about how hard it is for people to get married, especially I hear this from everybody. Successful people, successful in their career, successful in their family, even their family is socially connected, and they're like, why is it so difficult to get married nowadays? I don't understand. Especially people living in Muslim minority countries, where Muslims are like the UK and the US and Canada, Muslims are like a 1%, 2%, something like that. It's that people struggle anyways. So what you don't want to do is, when we're having this whole discussion about disclosing and not disclosing, you don't put this on your primary resume. Say, you know what? By the way, I struggled with so and so, and I wanted to. You don't mention this in the first meeting. This is something when you get to know somebody a little bit, so that they can look at all of your great traits that you have, and all of the good things that you have to offer. And then you can bring this up later on in the conversation of when things to become a little bit more serious, and say, well, is there anything that you feel that you need to be disclosing now that we're kind of getting to a more serious point? We've been speaking for a little while, and vice versa. And you say, okay, well, is anything that, there's some things that maybe I should disclose to you. Are there anything? So it could be debt that you're in. It could be, something else that, happened in your life that you want to mention, you want to bring up. You don't bring up those things in the first few conversations. So I just wanted to make that clear, is that we're not talking about when you're searching for someone, the first meeting you have, I want to disclose this to you, by the way. You're gonna scare everyone away, no matter how good they are, because in the beginning people are always thinking like, well, I don't want to, everyone starts out in the marriage search with uh I'm looking for the perfect person, or I'm gonna aim for the stars, until people kind of start to get wear down, and they're like, this is a really difficult process, and this and that. I have my own defects, and what am I willing? People start to adjust in their search, whether it goes on for a year or 2 years or 5 years. Because a lot of people come to me with all these complaints and their struggles about, trying to find, are they being too picky, or are they not being too picky? So I just want to address that as well. There's a lot of being too picky, and then many people adjust their criteria. So you have to understand that the person you're talking to also needs a little bit of time to adjust their criteria. And you will also learn to adjust your own criteria of how much you disclose to potential prospective people that you're talking about for marriage, because you may not just meet one. You may meet several, and this doesn't work out for whatever reason. It may be for any reason. This could be one of the factors. It could not be one of the factors. So you begin to kind of, as you get experience talking to other people, kind of like interviews, you can call it. The more interviews you get in a job interview when you're job searching, you gain experience and you adjust your presentation method and your style. Same thing that happens in marriage, pre-marriage interviews. You start to adjust the way in which you present yourself, the way you talk about this issue, and you're going to encounter different people. You're going to encounter some people who, when you even broach the subject, they're going to be like, I want to know all the details. Otherwise, it's unacceptable. Everything's off the table. I need to know every single detail. And then, and maybe that's not the right person. Maybe that's exactly what you needed to hear to make you
Mm,
realize that this is not going to be the right person.
I see.
And then you come across somebody else and they're like, listen, this is a little bit of a concern for me. I don't need to know all the details, but I need to know something that I'm confident that this is not going to significantly affect our marriage, and that may be the sign that, hey, this is the right person for me because of the way in which they're dealing with it, So all these nuances kind of come into play, which kind of puts things into the recommended category. But there's also the style in which, you have that conversation and things pan out.
And that's so important, the timing of when, like as you're saying, to tell it and to tell it later on in the relationship. And we have this, whole, people ask us, when is it? And, a lot of the times we advise and we say, when you think that things are going 100%, you think this is the one, and you think that, okay, I've not got any other questions. And actually, sometimes things like this can be a good litmus test, right? Because every person has baggage. Every single individual will bring some type of baggage into that relationship. If there isn't someone who's just going to bring perfection. So when a relationship reaches to that level where you can be vulnerable and share your defects, right, or however you want to put it, then that means that you've become comfortable enough in that relationship to share that, to be vulnerable enough to then to see how that other person reacts to that. And that, as you said, that comes later down when perhaps that pre-marriage you've known enough of the other person to say, yes, this is a good candidate. And even if I find out that, oh, he struggles with XYZ, then I know him enough to see him and not the struggle. Like we say, the same-sex attraction is a part of you. It's not you. It's not your identity. It's not you. It's a part of you. It doesn't mean that that other people can't see all the other parts of you. And one of the things that I struggled with my sexuality, and when I used to speak to God, I used to think, well, Allah, if you've given me this and you've given it to so many Muslims, then surely you must have created people who would be okay with it, right? Because um, in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the people of Lut, he says, um, وَتَذَرُونَ مَا خَلْقْنَكُم مِّنْ أَزْوَاجِكُم, and you're saying, go away from what was created for you by God, or أَتَتُونَ رِجَالَ مِنْ شَهْوَةٍ مِنْ دُونِ النِّسَاءِ, right? So God is explicitly saying that you're rejecting the women, right? In the story of Lut, alayhi salam. And what he's insinuating there is to say, well, if you had got married to them, it would have been okay. So then that almost is saying, if God has given you something, he's going to take you out of it. It's not like he's going to give you a struggle, and he's not going to give you a companion who's not going to help you on that struggle. So, because a lot of people, when they get married, they think that, why would someone marry me? Why would someone marry someone who has same-sex attraction or someone who has gender dysphoria? So when I read the Quran in that way, I was like, oh, subhanAllah, Allah is almost promising that there is someone for you, right? Even you, the person with same-sex attraction, with gender dysphoria, that God has thought about you and the right partner who is going to do it. Now, if you don't tell them, or if you get married to the person who, like you said earlier, that one thing might be too difficult for them. But if they never knew, then they would never know what they were getting themselves into. But having that understanding, at least from an Islamic sense, that there is something which God, there is a pair for you that God has promised you, as He says in the Quran, that you're rejecting what I created for you, then wouldn't it be right for them to think, no, that there will be somebody who sees me for my gender dysphoria, or sees me for my attraction, but still accepts me despite of that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there definitely there's going to be, and Allah is never going to give us a test more than we can handle.
Mm,
And the reality, even if we just look at the people that are out there, if anyone who did something, let's say someone committed a crime, let's say somebody is a registered, I don't know if they have this in the UK, but in America,
mhm.
we have something called registered sex offender or
Yeah,
something like that. Even if you're trying to rent a home or something like that, you're labeled. If you committed a felony and you came out of prison, I know you guys can't own guns over there, but like you can't get a gun here in America. And when you're applying for a job, it asks you, have you ever been convicted of a felony or a crime or something like that? So it becomes much tougher to get a job because you have this label on you.
yeah,
But it doesn't mean you can't get a job. All those people, they still end up getting jobs. It's not like they never work. It's not like they can never rent a place. They end up finding a place to rent. It becomes a little bit tougher. And that's where the fear comes in. And that's where the wisdom comes in, is that um how much do you disclose and when do you disclose it? That's the fear that's there. But at the same time, even if you did, it doesn't mean that, the first person or the third person you disclose it to, things may not work out and they may not be able to handle it, and even if you hint at it just a little bit, it may be too much for those people. And I am concerned that people will naturally, they're going to be like, this is hopeless. Like, this is not working. This strategy, like they're going to be going to, start going into depression and saying there's no opportunity for me. But if we keep the mentality like the mentality of anyone else who goes through those struggles, just people trying to find a place to rent, here in America, an African American, a Black American trying to rent in a white neighborhood, it's hard because there's racism around but you keep knocking on doors and you keep on trying, and there is something out there for you, like you're saying, and that's very important for people to, it's hard to remember that when you're going through the struggle and you're like, this was another letdown, I got shot down again. You have to remember that Allah has a plan. Allah's not going to test you with more than you can handle. If Prophet Lut offered his daughters or the women of the city, to the his people who were engaging in these acts, why would he do that if they're a lost cause completely? He would never do that. It means that there's hope for them. It means there's an alternative for them, right? So there's always an alternative for everybody. And that's what they need to always keep in mind. They need to remember. So when it comes to that, it's going to take time. It's going to be a little bit of a struggle. Two things that people have to remember. The first time is not always a charm. It's not always going to work the first time or the second time. And the second thing that they need to remember is that if somebody says no and turns you down, it may not just be because of this thing. It may be due to some other factors as well. And that's even hard enough for people to deal with. Rejection is not easy to deal with, whether it's rejection in a job interview, whether it's rejection in a marriage interview, or anything else. When you even if you're trying to sell something, you're in sales and you get rejected by a top client or something, it's hard to deal with. But people grow over time. So it is a struggle. The process itself that we're even discussing, the premarital process, is a struggle in and of itself already. And then when somebody comes with an additional variable, which makes it a little bit more challenging, it becomes a little bit harder to deal with. but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's very possible. And there's a lot of things that you can do to help you, deal with that challenge. And know that with dua and with the right support, Allah will help you. And you never should feel hopeless. That's a really important message that needs to be said again and again and again to everybody.
Absolutely. And it's that not to be hopeless, that you are going to find someone at the end. And it's worth having that struggle before marriage, right? Rather than after marriage, when
Mhm.
you don't have, it's rather, oh, this person rejected me, but actually I'm not going to see this person again. Versus, oh no, I've married the wrong person, or this person sees I'm the wrong person, and then it becomes very, very difficult. Absolutely.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that happens to so many people. Sometimes they're like, well, I wish I would have told you my eventual plan to move to Medina, when I hit 40 or something like that. They're like, well, I'm not leaving the UK or the US. I'm not leaving a Western. I can never live in a country like that. Well, that's been my dream and my vision to like retire there and have a business there and work remotely or something like that. And the other person is like, absolutely not. And they're gonna rebel. And you're like, well, I kind of should have told them about this plan that I have, because now they can't handle it. And now I'm in a really difficult situation because I'm caught between what I want to do and what the other person is like, absolutely no, this is a red line for me. So yeah, exactly. I mean, what you're saying is 100% on point. And I've seen it with so many people, is that you want to make sure uh you're not ending up marrying the wrong person because you didn't clarify one point that could have made things much clearer to say that, hey, this is not the right fit for me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to open up to questions because we've reached that time. So if you have a question, please put in the Q&A below. Just know that you can also ask anonymously. Just know that this is live, so it is streamed and it is on YouTube. So just be aware of that. But you can ask anonymously. You can, if you're not comfortable in this forum and you want Sheikh's contact details to ask him later, that is also possible as well. So yes, so we have some questions, which is there. There's one question which is saying, does the Sheikh speak Arabic? It's one question there.
نعم أتكلم عربية. لكن
Okay,
العربية
جيد.
الفصحى. Yes, I speak Arabic. I speak classical Arabic. So yes.
Okay, fantastic. So if there you have it, you have got the answer from the Sheikh. There's another question
And
which
maybe
says,
just to I'll just clarify that real
go
quick.
ahead.
So if the reason why the person is asking is to check my scholarly credentials, that's perfectly fine. If they're asking because they want a consultation, like over the phone or something like that, so I stopped doing that. So I don't do consultations over the phone, but I do accept emails. I don't mind giving my email address, so it's mustafau@gmail.com. And my website is mustafaumar.com, which is has my email on it. So if anyone wants to send me an email in Arabic, that's perfectly fine. But I just don't do phone consultations anymore. I just do it by email.
Yes, I think that question was more from an Arab speaker, and he wanted to
Oh,
contact you. So I think he'll probably contact you by email.
okay.
Um, so there's a question saying, "Salaam alaikum. I'm a fan of Sheikh Mustafa from Egypt. Do you think that there is much tolerance towards SSA um, uh, could be a negative thing?" Um, Even if it's appearing positive in a Muslim community. So I think that's what it's saying, is that sometimes, like in Egypt, when you're showing tolerance towards SSA, sometimes that's um, uh, people find it difficult to differentiate between same-sex attraction and LGBT. So someone who's LGBTQ and somebody who's same-sex attracted. Um, so yeah, so some people sometimes say, well, if you tolerate same-sex attraction, then aren't you promoting LGBTQ in a sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand how that can be the case. And I think most people who don't look into this, who don't understand this topic very well, including myself, prior to me looking into it a little bit more, there's an automatic assumption that the thoughts and the desires are equal to the identity and the actions. And, making that differentiation into two different categories, it's kind of natural for people, especially when we're coming from a climate where, we're taught to look down and despise what the people of Lut have done. And we, in the 1980s, in the 1990s, it was completely, unacceptable, openly in most countries, even in the United States and the UK for the most part. Movies were making fun of people who were gay and cross-dressing and things like that. And then it flipped. So people who are coming from a culture where it's okay, it's normal, it's actually promoted to poke fun at people and things like that. They're gonna equate the two, and it's understandable that they're equating the two, but and maybe we could have gotten away with it 40 years ago, but now because things have changed so much, it is almost a need for people to differentiate and put these two categories separately, because otherwise we're going to be wronging people who are in the first category. They're not in the second category, and we're confusing the two. And this should happen with other issues too. I mean, it happens with, people who have any other thing where they're inclined toward a desire versus they're internally identifying and acting on those desires. So I do see how tolerating and kind of having a sympathetic, like having sympathy for the attraction itself and trying to help the person. I can see how it's perceived as, well, you're kind of helping normalize homosexuality. So I understand exactly where it's coming from, but it's unfounded. It's wrong. And in fact, while the person is trying to say, well, that can potentially undermine our efforts to keep this type of behavior as an immorality, which is very clearly, the action is Islamically immoral action. It can undermine the effect of that. That's not the purpose behind it, and it's not guaranteed to undermine it. We have two extremes, and we're trying to take the middle approach between two extremes. And what happens is when you have these two extremes, one of them is absolute acceptance of any type of LGBT lifestyle or whatever it is, and then you have the other one to say, well, no, any type of attraction, the person should be punished for even feelings or something like that in order to prevent this. We're literally operating between two extremes. And this happens in everything. It happens in the hardcore conservatives versus the hardcore liberals in politics. It happens between the people who are promoting a type of massive communism, socialism versus capitalism and greed and not taking care of the poor, not helping them. We always have these two extremes. And Islam is almost always in the middle. It's always in the balance of these things. And when people see that the pendulum is shifting one way towards one of these extremes, they automatically think, well, the solution is to join the other party on the other extreme to kind of rebalance things. And that's actually not the solution. The solution is to be where you're supposed to be, but to be so forceful and to be so clear cut in your principles that you're going to actually help get both extremes back to the center. That's what we're supposed to be doing, rather than joining one of these two extremes, which are both against Islam. So I understand where the question is coming from, but I think I don't think this is a concern. I think especially in many Muslim majority countries, they need to also have this divide, because if they don't have this divide, they may be on the one side of, this type of any type of LGBT stuff needs to be shut down and slammed down, agreed from that perspective. But then anyone who's struggling with these feelings, we have absolutely no understanding, no support, no sympathy for them. They just need to work it out themselves and keep it under the carpet, and they're not going to have any support. And everyone should boycott them and shun them, and they'll automatically just, get fixed like that. That's not a solution. It's not a practical solution. And I think all the cases that you see in the Muslim majority world or any country that has that attitude, they're really bad cases. A lot of problems within the families and things like that. So we need a healthier approach to deal with the issue and not just react to an extreme reaction of the Western society with an equally extreme reaction of what's happening in other parts of the world.
Thank you. Said it so well. There's another question here which says, is there any way to indicate early in the stage of marriage, early in the stage of marriage interviewing, so not marriage, stage of marriage interviewing about my SSA? It is very draining to have to wait for that stage being open about vulnerability and realizing that they might reject me because of my SSA. So this question is saying, can I tell it earlier? Because it's draining for me that I might get rejected again.
Mm. Yeah, no, I mean, again, I want to clarify. I'm not a family therapist. Okay, so I'm just telling, my own experience. You might want to consult with someone who is more professional in that. But I can tell you from my experience in talking to many people, I do talk to a lot of people. Um, so I know somebody who they were searching to get married, and they have been divorced twice. And when they were talking to somebody again, like talking to someone, things were going really, really well. And then all of a sudden, when they mentioned that they were divorced, but they didn't mention that they were divorced twice. So when they mentioned later on, after all this, interviews and meetings and everything, it came up, and he said, I just wanted to clarify that, I've actually been married twice before, not just once before. Just wanted to clarify that, these girls would cut off and be like, okay, once was already tough for me because there's taboo about divorce in the Muslim community still. So it's like it took me time to wrap my head around that. But twice is just unacceptable. So I totally understand where the questioner is coming from. It's like, what, if you've been through that and you're like, what, I know this is a sensitive topic for people, and it's so draining to have to go through this process. And then you finally say, like, by the way, it wasn't one divorce, it was two. Or by the way, it wasn't just the relationship that I mentioned I went through, but it was actually a relationship with the same gender. And then you're just like, I invested so much time into that, so much, there was hope, things were looking good, and then you shot down. So can I mention it earlier? So this person that I knew, this brother, he got the advice from a family therapist that, what, because of what's going on in your situation, you don't want to have to keep going through this. You should mention it earlier on, maybe in the second or third or fourth meeting, and this brother did. And there were some people who were like, no, this is not acceptable to me. And then eventually he found the person who said, what, it's, I'm not going to judge you for it. My parents will have a little bit of an issue with it or something like that. They're kind of bothered. But that I am okay with that because I see you for who you are. And I understand that you learned the lesson that you learned in this and that. So yeah, sometimes it's on a case by case basis, but would it be unwise to disclose it in the beginning, especially if you've been through this process of getting shot down and you want to kind of, get past that hurdle early on? Yeah, absolutely. You could do that. And I know cases of people who have done that and they took that approach and it still worked for them. It worked for them and it saved them maybe a lot of headache because sometimes it can be quite a bit of a headache. So,
And it's being upfront, and sometimes being upfront and honest about your vulnerabilities shows as a positive, right? So some people, it depends on how the person reads it, but definitely if someone says, hey, this is the issue I have, then it's definitely something which is positive. So hopefully that answers that question there. There's another question that says, um, do sexuality and gender identity issues not make it difficult to have normal sexual relations. So this question is saying this is outright, it will make it difficult to have normal sexual relations. How to support this within marriage? So I guess this question is saying you have these issues, you must tell it. I guess I'm reading between the lines.
Mm. I mean, in terms of will it cause issues, again, that's going to be on a case by case basis. That's, I leave that up to the professionals. I mentioned in the paper the some of the therapies that are available for people with SSA, the Yar House and the Nicolosi Jr., Nicolosi Jr. and other ones. So those are the people who are going to be more specialized in that, in terms of those frameworks that they've developed and how they can help. Whether that can be overcome 100%, whether it's going to be 90%. This happens to everyone, though. So the reality is anyone who has had many sexual encounters with other people, or they've gone through any type of pornography, or trying to reenact that, or any type of extreme, or generally abnormal type of sexual experiences, or whatever it may be, there's going to be there's going to be some effect. There's a likelihood of being some effect there. How much of that can be reversed? That depends on how much a person puts in to the therapeutical process of trying to undo some of those things. There are like pornography is a good example, because the type of effect it has on your brain, the neuroplasticity in the brain, and how it affects the way in which you can connect with someone, the way in which I mean, it destroys lots of marriages. It destroys the intimacy in lots of marriages. But does anybody say that you're permanently damaged to the point where you're never going to get into any level of normalcy? No, nobody says that. Every single addiction program says, we can help you overcome this. Some people, it may take a few months. Some people, it may take several years. But, it is definitely something where you can restore normal, healthy intimacy. So we should take things along the same way when it comes to this issue. We should follow this. I wish there were programs. I mean, there might be, but they're not allowed to really be so public about their methods or what they're using, because of all this legal stuff that's going on. But that's exactly where we need to be. People talk about the harms of the stuff you watch and the stuff that you do on the internet, and how badly this can affect your future relationships and your current relationships. Like they talk about the physical harm, and they talk about the permanent damage. But after they say permanent damage, they say, but with the right therapy and the right people and the right approach and the right efforts, you can undo most of that, if not all of it. And I wish we would just have that kind of attitude and that kind of framework and that kind of hope for issues when it comes to these issues. If we had the right framework, the right therapy, the right attitude, the right people to talk to, and the right amount of effort, and the right tawfiq, success from Allah, it should be all in the same category. I don't see these as two different things in different categories.
Thank you. And that's so described so well, because we need the whole basis of Islam is that there's always maghfirah, there's always a way out for you. God doesn't give you something which says, yeah, I've given you this and there's no way out, right? And it used to be in, I think it's maybe Surah Al-Tahrim, where it says, and God will give you, a way out, man la yahtasib, give you and that's exactly. So it's kind of, and the shaitan actually wants you to believe that, oh, I have this attraction, then I'll have it for the rest of my life, and I'm stuck, and rather than thinking, no, things might change, and I might find the right person who will accept me, and Yeah, I think said so well.
Yeah,
Uh,
I love what Imam Ghazali says about this. You know, in the beginning of his magnum opus, his main book, Ihya Ulumuddin, he talks about, you know, people changing their character, their behavior. And he says some people, they will just make an excuse and they say, well, this is just the way Allah created me. You know, I'm an angry person, or, you know, this is the way I talk, or this is the way I am. And he says anyone who makes those who makes those statements about their behavior and they say, well, this is the way I am, I can't change. He's saying that, you know, you're basically saying that you're worse than wild animals, because he says if you look at wild animals, you look at dogs, you look at tigers, you look at the most ferocious of animals, they're called wild animals because they're wild, you know, they're not like domesticated animals like cows or something like that. He says even those type of animals, snakes and everything, they can be tamed by a professional trainer. You know, they will have like almost absolute control over, you know, a tiger, over a snake. You know, the flute chart, you play a flute and the snake is dancing, and you have dogs, like really, you know, wild dogs. They're going to be completely put in check by their owner who trains them, by their trainer. So he's like, you know what? We're human beings. Allah has given us an intellect. He's given us the ability, you know, to rationalize things. He said, if you make the excuse that you can't change and you can't improve and you can't like get back to where you're supposed to be, you know, Allah gave you a test for a reason, then you're saying that you're worse than wild animals, because even wild animals can be put in line. You know, that's a beautiful thing. And every time I think about that, because sometimes people, they say, you know, you're getting angry, you lose your temper, you just start yelling and shouting, and you're like, well, this is the way I am, you know, you just got to accept it. I can't change. And the moment someone says I can't change, or I can't overcome this, they're basically, the Imam Ghazali statement comes back to me. I'm thinking wild animals being tamed. I'm like, you know what? We have like white tigers in Las Vegas being tamed like by a tamer. One time I know it chopped off somebody's head, bit somebody's head off. But other than that, for decades, you know, they've been tamed. You know, you can tame these wild animals. You can tame yourself as well, and you can overcome these issues. And Allah's not going to give us a test with more than we can handle. He wouldn't ask us to do the things we're supposed to be doing. You know, so.
it's so many times we say, "Oh, you're an animal," or you some type of insult like that, right? And we think actually no, that's worse than an animal because animals still can be
Exactly.
trained. Or I think there's maybe a verse in the Quran that saying, "No, they're not like sheep. Oh no, they're not even like the sheep. They're
I
more
know. Yeah,
astray."
they're adult. Yeah, they're even
Yeah,
more misguided,
even
worse,
yes.
worse than animals.
Subhanallah. We have a final question, and I think someone wants to speak. What I will say is just be aware that this is it's live and it's recorded, you know, just you do know that. But yes, you can pose your question. So I think this Brother Mahmoud, which wants to pose a question. Go ahead, Brother Mahmoud.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Walaikum assalam, Brother
Sheikh
Mahmoud.
Mustafa and beloved brother Ali. Uh, and it's very good that Sheikh Mustafa talks in Arabic. Um, I am I think that we need much of his knowledge in Arabic. It would be very good for us, really. I am in Egypt as well. I will try to explain some much of my question about tolerance. I meant by tolerance that if we say that having same-sex actions, not attractions, is something that is from al-kabair, from the big sins. If we talk much about it and try to have more tolerance, I think that it could watering down the issue as if it becomes something normal, something less in its effect on our ears, on our listening. So I think that it could it could be negative in our communities if we talk about it in a simplicity that don't cope with the badness of the sin. I am here talking about actions, not talking about people.
Not the
People
feeling,
may,
the action and not the feeling.
yes, because people may be from the best people because of jihad al-nafs, and they are trying to be better, and that's a test. And that's it. And looking forward to listen from Sheikh Mustafa Umar in Arabic. I am a fan of you since Baba Ali show. I have re-listened to it many times, really. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank,
Allah yabarak fikum.
thank you so much, Brother Mahmoud. Yes, go ahead, Sheikh.
Yes, and alhamdulillah. So yeah, it is always challenging to talk about intimacy, openly and publicly. You know, it was a better culture in the past where we would be much more reserved. We would use more reserved wording, especially around children, especially in the way in which we teach. You know, there used to be a class called Human Growth and Development, and you know, it's like many Muslims, even when I was growing up in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, my parents didn't want me to take those classes. They would ask me, they would be like, no, you're going to be exempted from those classes because we don't want you to be learning about these things at such a young age, because the more explicit you learn, even if it's done in a scientific manner, the more explicit it is, the more it's vulgar and it's direct. It's just meant, it doesn't need to be addressed at that level. And I agree. I think that was a beautiful approach. Of course, it still needs to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed in an Islamically age appropriate manner. And the way that it's addressed nowadays, it does desensitize people from the issues and from how serious of these things are, in terms of this is everywhere. So it's not just referring to SSA or homosexuality as the action, but just zina has become completely normalized. And I think, what the brother is mentioning is that everything becoming normalized in movies, in everywhere you go, everyone is doing it. Like, if you just think about, it's probably similar in the UK. Here in America, if you're in middle school, uh, almost everyone has a boyfriend or girlfriend, or even high school. In fact, the number of people who don't engage in any physical relationship before marriage is a minority of a minority. I mean, the conservative Christians, like the most conservative Christians we find here. I went to a church one time, a really conservative church, like evangelical conservative. These are like very hardcore, Bible practicing people, super Republican and everything. Everything's by the Bible. The pastor was giving a talk to the youth and saying, you know what? Listen, you guys just need to make sure you don't go all the way before marriage. That was the extent of the most conservative that you could find. So where are Muslims? So how do we preserve that purity within the culture when talking about zina and relationships and reproduction and contraception and all those things? So I think that's what the brother was referring to, is the more we keep talking about these things openly and too much and directly, yes, it does kind of water things down. And I agree with that. It definitely does. Just the sad reality is that when we live in the West, here in the US, UK, Canada, it's literally at a level where it's so in your face. We are reacting. And we have to react, because if we don't react, then we're going to be completely ineffective. The ideal would be to have a society where there is a level of modesty when we're discussing these issues, and how we discuss these issues, and in which format and all that. But because there's nonstop immodesty around us, we have to respond. And if there's another country, I don't know the current status of Egypt. I haven't been there in a while, but like there may be some countries where they still have that preservation of this type of modesty around these issues. So the way that they're going to address those things is not going to be the way that we're addressing them. in the English speaking world. They should address them. They still need to address them, but it should be in a different format or a different way or using a different language. Then we're addressing these issues much more head on in another place.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned about age appropriateness of these issues is um, and that's why I think the Quran is so beautiful when it talks about stories. So you can tell the story of Lut to a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and you can just change the story. It's just the story still gives you the example, but you can change the story. Like I remember reading, a children's book on story of Lut. It wasn't graphic. It was just, saying that these people did some acts which were wrong and they got punished, right? And then that's what that child needs at that time. When that child grows older, then they'll understand, oh, this was the act that they did, right? So the Quran has a beautiful way of addressing the topic because it's done in a story, and then that story could be understood more in depth as the child grows older in terms of what that means. We're still understanding the story of Lut. We can continue to still understand the story of Lut and the significance of it. So I think it's beautiful having that age appropriate understanding of the issue, and what you said earlier, that Islam is a middling, it's in the middle. So it's not kind of the Prophet was a Bashir and one Nazir, and he was both. He would warn, he would give the good tidings as well, but he would warn as well. And we came from an upbringing where we didn't hear anything about it, right? Or we didn't hear enough about it. And now we're in the extreme where we're always hearing about it, right? So then it's kind of like coming to a middle of it to say, okay, if we're talking about LGBTQ, as you wrote in that paper, you were talking it in the reference of family, right? And it's kind of like always saying, okay, we were talking about LGBTQ, but the basis of it is family. It's anything that's affecting the family unit. And I think that then helps to middle it, to have that central grounding, to say anything that is affecting the family unit becomes then very important to discuss, because the um, the Prophet said the most sacred institution in Islam is marriage, because it's the bedrock of our families, and kind of creates that for us, um, and and when it's framed in that overall view, then it doesn't seem like we're just picking on a particular sexual interest or just gender dysphoria or something like that. Yeah. Um, we've reached time. Is there anything, closing remarks, anything that you wanted to cover, Sheikh, now that we've not covered in terms of this topic? I give the floor to you.
No, alhamdulillah, I think we've covered everything, and just want to remind everyone that it is challenging to, at the same time, to have this balance. And the key is to always have this balance in the way we talk about the issue, in the way we internalize the issue, and all of that stuff. Every time you feel like you're navigating towards one of the extremes, just try to pause and try to recalibrate yourself and say, what would Allah want me to do in this situation? And that's my general advice for everybody.
Fantastic. I love that. Having uh, summarized taqwa, right? What would that God-centric approach, what would God like me to do in this situation? And having that centeredness in God. Uh, Thank you so much. We will share, I think, the PDF that we talked about is already there. We will share it with the audience. Thank you so much for your courage in continuing to talk about this topic, and at least for us, in strong support, and the community. We're so grateful to have you as a resource for us among the scholars. And it's so, I can't put into words how important it is to have the scholarly backing and the scholarly input on this issue, because for the parents, for people who struggle, it means that, oh wow, okay, someone is considering our use case, someone is considering what they're going through. And I think what you mentioned just now in the webinar of how same-sex attraction being one of the issues or one of the things, when we look at it holistically in terms of marriage, and kind of saying the society might see it as, oh my God, this is a big thing, but in Islam, it's only one of the things which is coming into a marriage, and there's so many other things that can come into a marriage. But having that wisdom of when to share and when to be um, uh, truthful and sincere in knowing that if I do the work earlier in the journey, then it's going to pay off, rather than me getting invested in a relationship later and then finding it harder at that time, or knowing that person couldn't have dealt with it. But also knowing that each person's, like you said, situation is different, and marriage in itself is not, like you ended, marriage itself is not an easy task. And to going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala each time and saying whatever comes up, saying what would God want me to do? What is the most thing that would be right for me if I consider God, and put God ahead in my life and see what's the right thing for me to do at any moment. So thank you so much, Sheikh Na. May Allah bless you, and thank you for spending this time. And inshallah, we speak soon. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.